Welcome, Carl. Welcome, everybody. This is the Friends of Fifth Line podcast or video series where we generally meet up with people in the professional world that are close to Fifth Line, venture debt advisory and financial services firm, and all the partners that work in the small business ecosystem. So Carl O'Brien Yavar here joins us from Zaelab. Carl, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, good morning. So I am ostensibly a Salesforce consultant. I've been specializing in the CPQ space for about 10 years, which is funny to say. I have 12 certs in the Salesforce ecosystem, which we'll talk about why so many, because CPQ really has its fingers in all the pies, which is one of the reasons that I love it so much. I've done something over 100 projects. I stopped counting at 100 in for a variety of different industries and company sizes and all that different stuff. So excited to share some of what I've learned through my career.
Certainly. So I got to ask first, though, how did you actually get into CPQ and what is CPQ for those that don't know what CPQ is?
Sure. So CPQ stands for Configure Price Quote. It is essentially the product selection, configuration, and pricing mechanism inside of your Salesforce environment. The two examples that people will be most familiar with are like the meal deal sort of example, where you have multiple products coming together to be sold for one price, and you can see all of that very clearly. All the way up to a very complex example like vehicle manufacturing. If we go on BMW.com right now, we could go configure an entire vehicle. It would tell us the price that we're going to pay at the end of that. And then that would jump us off into the actual like purchasing part of like money exchange of that. So it really handles all of that sales process and takes you through all of the different mechanisms within that process. How did I get into it? Happy accident, really. I can't say enough about how important this day was for me. It was like a Thursday at 10 o'clock in the morning. The owner of my company called me on my cell phone. I'm like, ooh, I've never even spoken to you. So I picked it up. Hey, Jim, what's up? How can I help you? Hey, man, there's this thing called Steel Brick. We just sold this project. We need somebody to learn it and really, take this on. And it was something that really meshed so well with my previous personal experience in terms of kind of transaction management. I come from a real estate background where the idea of bringing a customer through that process is really important. And so that this tool just happened to be something that really meshed well with the way that I think and my interests. And like I said, that was one of the best days of my life. Absolutely life changing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know you've really dove into learning the craft, learning the systems, thinking about how you can be better for your clients and how you can improve your own skill set. So I can see it. I can see it.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, of course, man. For those of you that don't know, known Carl for a few years now, worked on some projects with him as a little bit of a disclosure. But ultimately, he is very good at running a project and will push you to think through what is actually required of you and of him to make sure the project gets finished as well as possible. So in that sense, you were on an inside position helping out with this particular new implementation. Is that what it was? How did you
So
actually, or were you guys in a consulting capacity at this company?
yeah, so I've pretty much always worked as a partner, as a
Okay.
consultant in the Salesforce space. And for like I'm sure a lot of your audience knows kind of what partners entail, but partners really just help you expand your functionality, expand your capability within your organization. I specialize in CPQ, which is an expansion of the Salesforce tool. And Salesforce is essentially a business platform that enables a lot of different business functionality. I happen to, again, specialize in the kind of sales part of that. But the benefit that you get from working with someone like me or any partner is not only the expertise that you get from me working with you and kind of navigating through that project, but also that kind of cumulative knowledge of the entire organization. And that's always, in my experience, that's always going to be a much better bang for your buck than trying to hire that internally. This skill set is a fairly expensive skill set, and if it's something that you want to bring onto your team, you have to have a really specific plan for that, and especially a plan for the future. Whereas for us, we can come in, hit a limited engagement, accomplish that targeted success, and then dip out if we need to.
Totally makes sense. And of course, being a partner, as you were saying, for these businesses that are trying to implement CPQ, um, you've been a part of projects and client relationships that I'm sure have been wonderful, and those that haven't necessarily gone quite as well. And you could argue that it's tough to judge a book by its cover, but you could still probably do enough discovery before diving into a project to understand just who you're going to be working with and what you're getting yourself into. So how do you make sure that you find the appropriate partner for your engagement size and needs?
Yeah, so discovery is a really important thing, and we want to bring that up again when we're talking about the actual project. But when you're entering into your investigation, your discovery of who am I going to partner with, there are several things that you can do to make sure that you're getting the right person or the right team. Excuse me. So typically in a Salesforce engagement, your AE, your account executive, is going to be the person who is going to largely introduce you to partners who you should consider using. Often AEs will have preferred relationships where they know people that they've been able to work with successfully multiple times in the past. And so that is something to take into consideration, is to understand the track record that AE might have with a partner or might not have, right? Sometimes there are new relationships. And in those cases where if you trust your AE, you should be able to trust the recommendation that they're giving you for your partner. But if you have maybe less trust or less track record, you can go onto a website called App Exchange. That's sort of the Salesforce, one of the ways that you can find out about Salesforce extensions, like applications that you can install into your system, but also ways to find different partners to work with. In the App Exchange, there are two ways that you can make sure that the people that you're working with have the base qualifications that you're looking for. One is the reviews. Reviews can be manipulated in that, like, if I didn't have a good project, I'm not going to send you a survey, right? So if you find someone with a lot of 5-star projects, that's great. That doesn't mean that they've only had successful projects. That just means that they've had a lot of them, which is a really good thing. The other way that you can look is to see the actual, I forget the specific terminology, but it's like, what accreditations do they have? So there's different levels of partners, and there's different qualifications within those levels. So lots of the leveling have to do with size. That size has to do typically with headcount. And as you get into the larger areas, some other measurements that doesn't really matter for this, for the purposes of the conversation. The other thing that you have are different, like I said, accreditations, where if you have a certain number of people in your team with the right certifications, that will give you a certain level of partnership or a certain level of accreditation. So all of the partners that I've worked with have always been like Revenue Cloud accredited, like that are focused on those things. So if you're going to, especially for CPQ, if you're going to focus on a specific cloud or a specific functionality, you should look for partners that have that specific accreditation. If you're going for somebody with Marketing Cloud, if they have CPQ, well, that doesn't really matter because you're looking for marketing, right? So pay attention to the actual qualifications of your team. And as part of your negotiation with that partner in the sales process, try to be specific about who your team is actually going to be, right? I am like cross-functional, so I participate in the sales process and I also participate in delivery of projects. So when I participate in sales, my level of experience makes that process seem like it's going to be really great. And if you continue to work with me, it's going to be really great. But if you don't write into the SOW, hey, I want Carl, or I want this specific person, or I want this specific level of experience, then you're a little bit rolling the dice with who's actually going to be on your project. Because the nature of consulting delivery is that you always need to be busy, you always need to be staffed. So if I have a project that kicks off today and I'm up for it, if your project doesn't kick off for 3 weeks, I might not be available for that project. You might have somebody else.
Totally agree and understand with that. At Fifth Line, we have a combination of in-house resources and then CFOs in our network who might potentially have 10 to 15 hours a week of open bandwidth, are interested in being put on projects where they feel as though they know the industry, they've got the expertise, like they bring that level of experience you're talking about. And so we go through the sales process on their behalf and on our own behalf. And quite often I'm asked, so are you going to be the one working on my engagement? And sometimes the answer is yes, X amount. Other times the answer is no, not specifically, but for these areas you've called out, I might be brought in for the technical accounting side because from a certification standpoint, being a CPA, they tend to look at that, right?
Yep.
So fully appreciate that. And I think that is an important aspect, especially if you have customers that maybe aren't always in Salesforce. You talk about the AE relationship. They might not always be interacting with the AE. And if there's an aspect of where they don't know what they don't know, I think it's very helpful. You just called out a few different qualifications or compatible skill sets that you could look up when thinking about what the scope of the project might actually entail. So
Yeah.
on that note, I'm curious to know, after you've met with a client, you've understood a little bit of what they're looking for. How do you make sure that as clients with different personalities, different stakeholders involved, different problems that they're trying to solve for, some more complex than others, how do you actually go about suggesting that the client itself takes on a good project management strategy with their partner?
So there's a lot of moving parts there. So I want to try to break it down a little bit.
Sure.
So just very quickly, want to hit on the idea of just good traditional PM best practices, right? Making sure that you have a strong SOW. Hopefully that SOW is generous, right? Because that gives you a little bit of wiggle room, hopefully to try to get some additional functionality in, and maybe to try to navigate some unforeseen complexity, which there usually is. Um, so having good stand-ups, having good, like touch points, making sure that we're communicating regularly about the status of the meeting, or excuse me, about the status of the project, making sure that the budget's on track, all those sorts of things. And so I want to just set that to the side because I think that like there's a lot there, but that's no, right? So I want to just set that to the side. The first thing that you mentioned is the idea of like personal relationships. And that's something that I think is really important because we worked together for what, 9 months, right? Is it like something like that? And
Primary, and then we had ancillary touch
yeah,
points. Yeah.
and we were talking between 1 and 4 times a week for 9 months. So it's really important that you have a good relationship both ways, right? That you just have a good personal relationship with the people that you're working with. Um, and from a consulting standpoint, that's when I'm coaching junior resources. I say a lot of the time, being a consultant requires you to be a really complete human being because you're going to deal with a lot of different personalities You're going to deal with people who are very number driven. You're going to deal with people who are very experience driven. You're going to deal with people who just want the system to work. It's like, why are you messing with what I know? Right. So you have to meet a lot of different people where they are, and those places are a lot of different places. So from a just purely how am I navigating these personal relationships, it takes a lot of sensitivity to make sure that you're guiding that through correctly. Um, Also, it's kind of a funny thing, but like I don't know if you remember this, I kind of cut off small talk at like 3 minutes. All right. Because it's like I'm gonna give you a little bit of small talk, but also like 3 minutes of my time is about $12. So I don't really want to get too much into that, right? So it's like I'm gonna give you a small dose and then let's transition into work pretty quickly.
All
Um,
business. Yeah.
but then these technical problems are really fun to solve, but in a lot of cases they are hard and they take a lot of people's time and input to make sure that you're navigating through that correctly. Um, so with that, this is where I want to bring up discovery again, because that discovery process, as you're actually kicking off the project, right? We're now in it and we're starting. That discovery process is super super important. Not only to make sure that you're accomplishing everything that you need to accomplish from the SOW, but the reality of a tool like CPQ is that you are now introducing many more functionalities into your experience, or potential functionalities than you ever had access to before. And most of the time, people who are moving to a tool like CPQ are coming from something like Google Sheets or Excel, right? Something that doesn't have the level of functionality, doesn't have the level of automation to be able to achieve the level of success that you want, right? So when you're navigating through that, you have to like I really try to take a very expansive approach because I want to understand everything that you're trying to accomplish. Whether or not that's necessarily on the SOW, you telling me that you want to do something doesn't commit you to anything, right? It just tells me that you have interest in a thing. When we're done with discovery, I can take all of the things that I heard you say, and I can put that into a structure that allows you to accomplish all of those things, whether that's now or in the future. And it's your decision on how you want to invest your project budget. And if you come through discovery and you realize, oh, this functionality that we didn't really talk about during the sales process, that's actually really important, and we want to raise the priority of that, and we want to maybe replace some of the budget. Like we want to take out some of the stuff that we originally agreed to, and we want to replace it with this, or we might want to increase our budget, or we might want to phase that out for the future. And that's what we ended up doing, right? Is that we said, okay, well, there are some things that we're really interested in, but our SOW is very important. We want to accomplish that first. And then when we find that that is successful, we will consider doing the next thing. So, but
100%.
if I don't know what you're trying to do in the future, I might create a structure for you that prevents you from doing that or makes it harder for you to do that. And that is not what I am aiming to do. I want everything to be as easy as possible.
Totally. The ease promotes efficiency, and that is one of the primary things. And then that you've talked about, if a human doesn't have to do it, let's automate it, right? So
Absolutely.
I can appreciate
Humans are
that.
fallible. Humans are fallible, and especially when you are relying on very specific and accurate information, especially as it relates to revenue and those sorts of calculations and measurements, you have to be just ruthless about what precedes that, what feeds that information.
Yes. And so I have two questions. You can respond in whichever order you'd like. When it comes to getting through the project and then actually having the changes in the system implemented and adopted by the team, um, what does the typical process look like as you're like managing that change? And what does it end up? I guess what does the, how do I phrase it? How long does that iterative period last before you say, all right, we've kind of moved on? Because that's one of the things with consulting that I know I've heard from people out in the general business world, which is we come in, we make recommendations. Depending on where you are, you might actually do the execution and implementation of things. But then at a certain point, when the customer is actually going to take it on themselves, some people might say, well, we don't have exactly what we thought we had, or we think that this is going to change things immediately, but there's a longer adoption process. How do you go about managing that before you say, okay, we've done the job that we were looking to do?
So what I'm hearing most from that question is the idea of like change management, training, kind of benchmarking success. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes.
All right. So change management is something I'm gonna just tell all the uncomfortable truths today, man. So realistically, training, change management is the thing that suffers the most from budget restriction. And to the point that we were just talking about, as we go through discovery and I go, have you considered this? Have you considered that? Did you know about this? Did you know about that? People start thinking, oh, I'd like to have that more functionality. Every hour of time costs some amount of money. So if you are trading your time for functionality versus change management or training, that's a decision that typically goes the way of functionality. And to usually to the detriment of a project. So I am very interested and focused on the idea of user experience and understanding how easily a system might be adopted by the users and making sure that it's something that is intuitive and easy to use. But every, you have to be trained to use the gun that fires the silver bullet, right? So it doesn't matter how good your mechanism is if you don't know how to use it, if you don't know how to use it correctly, you're not wisely investing your time. So I consider change management to be extremely, extremely important. At a minimum, having some kind of user training. Typically, that's a train the trainer approach, where depending on who your users are and who is best equipped to give them that information, that is usually a cost effective way of handling that. Having a larger, more formal change management structure, which involves like role analysis, persona analysis, is hugely beneficial and very much aids in the adoption. And that is something that is another significant investment in your project. So it really comes down to the willingness of the organization to make that full investment. And in the absence of that full like formal change management, which I should say happens, probably in my experience, single digit percentages of the time. It just doesn't happen that often, but there's always some sort of, here's some documentation, here's some training, we're going to record these things, make sure that you have that. But truly the best way to make sure that you have that ongoing support is to look at an engagement like a managed services engagement, where you have that ability to call someone like me, someone on my team who can say, all right, this thing isn't working the way that it should. Is this a user problem? Is this a system problem? And to allow for not only the maintenance but also the enhancement of your system as your users start living in the house a little bit and starting to get used to it. And then understanding, oh, you know what, I think the coffee pot should actually be over here. Like, okay, fine, like we can make little changes like that. But truly, I really just want to hammer home on the importance of actual training and making sure that users understand how to use the system. As a partner, I should be making an intuitive system that has, obviously named fields and objects, and there's help text on fields that makes it clear what those fields are supposed to be doing. But again, you have to give your users support to understand how to be successful with your system.
Makes sense. Thank you. So we've talked about initially like how to go about selecting a partner. We've talked about what the general discovery and scoping process looks like, how you go about managing the change. When it comes to what you in that change management aspect, you got into the phase approach of like during project and afterward, all that. But when you're actually in the project and you're managing the project, there's got to be a key set of stakeholders that are along for the ride with you, be it one, two, three more people. How do you go about actually building out that plan so that way people can accomplish the goals that they're setting for and like working with the team there to make sure that you've got the proper architecture, you've got the proper accuracy, you've got everything built out as needed for what you have defined and what you have communicated is in line with that scope.
Yeah, so just want to reiterate framework of discovery again. Just using our experience, I think is really helpful. Because if you think about as we went through discovery, I first had you start with a questionnaire, right? Go through this, give me as much information as I can so I can start understanding the way that you're thinking, understanding your language so that we can start, getting simpatico, right? So from there, I also took a very keen eye on the different ways that you might answer those questions, right? And so even during discovery, I'm looking for alignment and conflict between your requirements. So understanding that, okay, if I ask you this question here, I ask you this question a little bit different over here, you gave me a different answer. Why did you give me a different answer? Is it because of the way that I asked the question? Is it something with my communication that might need to square between us, or is there some more information that I need to pull on that thread a little bit? So firstly, you really have to take that keen eye on the detail and making sure that as you're putting together the structure, that there's no conflict between those, because there's a lot of moving parts in this in this structure, and it's easy for those things to become crosswise, or it's easy for the effects of those mechanisms to multiply against each other in ways that you didn't expect. So that's why I always want to sanity check and say, all right, that's cool, but if I did mechanism 1, 3, and 4 combined, this is the combined effect of that. Are you comfortable with that? And then you go, oh, actually, no, I didn't really understand that that's the way that it would be, right? So that's the first line of defense, is me as a partner making sure that we are clear about the individual things that we're accomplishing and the cumulative effect of the things that we're accomplishing. Then as we're navigating through the process, and this is again where I have to give you guys kudos, our project team, like on your side, was very clear about what needed to be accomplished, and we're very comfortable saying, nope, that's not something that we're going to take on right now. Might be something that we do for the future, but right now that's not in alignment with what we're actually trying to accomplish. And in some cases we say, oh, that, yeah, actually, yeah, that would be great, we need to do this. And then we have that conversation. Okay, what would it take to accomplish this? How much budget? Are we now asking for more money? Are we taking this away from something else? So those two things really go hand in hand. And I know I keep saying discovery, but it's such the important staging event for all of the success that you're going to have in that project. If you don't have good discovery, your project is already on shaky ground. But again, like, you guys were such great partners to us as we were working through that, to help us understand, hey, I need you to go have this conversation with the business to help them understand why that's something that we're not going to do right now. And if you need my support to help you navigate that conversation, to give you more technical information, I am here to give you that support. But that's where your job as the customer in this, partner relationship was really important, because you're the conduit to the business to help them understand this is what we're doing or not doing, and this is why we're doing or not doing those things.
Totally agree with you. Besides simply having a conversation with you, one of the reasons why I thought this would be a good idea in general when you talked about potentially coming on the video series is that working in finance and accounting, there are elements of what I do that customers don't necessarily have a full grasp on. So that technical bit we're talking about, they know that there's an importance to it. They know that it is something that has to be taken care of either for regulatory reasons or to get them to the growth goals that they need, right? Talking about efficiency and effectiveness and continuous improvement in the organization. But the discovery process for us is also super important, because if you have someone that's an excellent creative or an engineer and maybe doesn't have that same quantitative or technical background, there's an element of guiding and coaching and making sure that everything is understood as well as possible in the beginning, and then continuing that through the rest of the engagement. So that way it's not an unclear result. It's not anything that's a surprise as you're going along the way, or you might have some when it comes to accounting, but some minimal surprises as we're digging into things, you know?
Yeah.
So ultimately, we as partners look to help encourage and grow and support the businesses that we work with. And so I think that's one of the cool spots that we've got right now on the data front, on everything else that's coming out technology wise. I know that the CPQ side is where you're primarily focused, but ultimately there's a ton of opportunity for tech-enabled services, tech-enabled product management, everything like that in our future business world. So
Yeah,
anything
absolutely.
else that you want to cover before we close out today?
Um, so the thing that I just wanted to highlight, which I don't think that we kind of touched on a little bit, but the
Dig
idea
deep.
of your data architecture is extremely important, and to understand what you are trying to accomplish at the end of the day. Um, we talked a little, like, one of the more technically complex parts of the project that we worked on was commission calculations, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
if you want any system, with Salesforce, or if there are other systems that do more specific commission stuff, but if we think about the moving parts, I kind of took a couple notes, but so the commission calculation that we worked on involved the role of the user,
Hmm.
the level of quota attainment, the a tiered percentage within the transaction,
Hmm.
a evaluation of the customer type,
Hmm.
and a evaluation of if changes were made within a certain amount of time after the deal was closed. So if you think
Yes.
about, that's 5 data points that comes from the user object, the order object, the quote and quote line object, the account object, and the contracts and subscriptions. So it's technically 7 objects. So if you're not paying attention to what information exists where, and what data is required for you to achieve the results that you want to achieve,
Hmm.
you can't possibly achieve those results. You're going to be missing something about an account, something, you're not going to have the right order information. And I can't tell you how often I'll start a project and go, what's a customer? How do I know who a customer is? And they'll go, I don't know.
Data dictionaries are key. We say that on the accounting side as well. So many companies that define revenue as just cash collected, and that works if you are a cash basis business. But for many companies that are trying to beef up their financial standing for investors or for lenders who ask for things on an accrual basis, you can have a very night and day difference as to what your revenue actually is.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
So And that also, that kind of gets back to the idea of regulations and those sorts of things, is that often your architecture or your user process is going to be dictated by some sort of regulation. The one that I'm seeing come up most recently is AST 606, with that idea of like, making, I can't even.
Revenue recognition. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Variable consideration.
that those regulations have specific effect on the way that the users are going to interact with your system. And if I don't know upfront that you are obligated to follow those regulations, then I'm going to make a system that doesn't care about those things. So that's where, again, like, it's I'm sure that as we went through, it felt annoying a lot of the time, because I'm like, hold on, wait, what did you mean by that? Tell me more about that. How do you define that word? But all of those things are so important, and that's why our ability to have a friendly relationship throughout our project was really important, because that is the glue that kind of holds you together through the, hold on, what did you mean by that? You told me something different last week. So like, what changed? Did I not understand something? But you
Totally.
you have to have someone who's going to be doing that, in order to make sure that at the end of the day, that you have that holistic architecture that's going to give you success.
Totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. Yes. Well, thank you very much for the time today, Carl. We could keep talking, but we are coming up to the end of our slot. So
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
appreciate you being on. Hopefully you'll come again at some point. We can talk a little bit more about the stuff that's fun for me on RevOps. But otherwise,
I would love it. I would love it anytime, man.
I wish you a great rest of the day and thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you, brother. Take care.